100%, you would expect a corresponding increase in tariffs. Okay. But what is the problem? Yes, it is true that the utility companies are burdened. They need additional inflows and so on to be able to maintain current services. That is true.
Yes, me da fo ma me mfa seda kese mfa ma na me mfa nche mo din free mega TV aso ye mfa mo bibia otie mega TV abusia ye beda ase papa se abre na o kan ho na itimi hwibom na yesrew se na your first time abomodina na fa usa bo subscriber team so na touch notification bell na be bo na abre na no news ba onso be get in touch na etimi ahwe abom ama bibia ko wano ye Kwesi Pratt Junior odin sembi atodwa e good morning Ghana show so na osi nsem ne de emu ahyi wate ase edu ni mu ahyi pa na ansa na yebeto aso no me pese odo nsabo subscribe button no so now subscribe to your channel no se unyanye ni sa abusunya waye ni sa de mentwa akuruse na menda wase papa na memfa de etwa ho emfa ma.
I think that these are all symptoms of a failing economic model, if not a failed economic model. And when you reach this stage, nothing works. Traditional prescriptions do no longer present as cure. That is where we are. And I'm quite surprised that tariffs, utility tariffs for water have gone up only by
8%.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised.
Why?
Because earlier on, I'd heard that as a result of the effect of galamsey, the cost of treatment of water had gone up by 100%. You understand? So if you have a situation where the cost of treatment has gone up by 100%, you would expect a corresponding increase in tariffs. Okay. But what is the problem? Yes, it is true that the utility companies are burdened. They need additional inflows and so on to be able to maintain current services. That is true. But it's also true that the consumers cannot pay. Okay? And so what do you do under these circumstances? Now, for me, the other problem is simply that these increases in tariffs do not provide any assurance that the fundamental problems leading to the increases in tariffs will be stopped. In fact, they are growing. So if you accept these increases in tariffs, 6 months from now, there will have to be more increases in tariffs. 1 year from now, there have to be more increases in tariffs. Where do we stop? Meanwhile, the earning capacity of industry, of workers and so on, continues to come down. This is the crisis. This is the deep crisis into which we find ourselves. So merely increasing tariffs doesn't solve the problem. But if you don't increase tariffs also, we are grinding to a halt. This calls for rethinking. This calls for fundamental, non-conventional changes in the management of the national economy. There's no other way. If you accept these tariff increases, in 6 months' time, they will come again. In 1 year, they will come again. 2 years from now, they will come again.
In fact, it's every quarter now.
Meanwhile, the capacity of the consumer to pay is dwindling. And there's nothing in sight to suggest that capacity is going to improve.
But the options that you propose are not on the table. And by virtue of the fact that we all know where we are headed towards in terms of our dealings with the IMF and all that. I mean, what this means is that if inflation is not tamed, if the currency depreciation is not tamed, obviously,
if you don't deal with galamsey.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, for every quarter, we should be expecting increments. The option to the increment will be to have the utilities shut down or engage in outages because we know that government is not in a position to subsidize. And even the program that we are entering into will not even allow for that to happen.
Yeah, but that's not the only option. There are many other options, available to us,
Even though we are embarked on the IMF part, the IMF program part.
Well, I've said that the IMF part is not a solution to the crisis that confronts.
No, I'm just dealing with the reality.
Okay.
Yes.
But
I'm not saying that outside the IMF program there cannot be options. In any case, the government itself thought there was an option.
Yeah.
And it went on that path and it crashed and it's come to the IMF. So I'm not suggesting that there are no other options. All I'm saying is that the reality is that this is where we're headed.
The reality on the new liberal path. The new liberal party development is responsible for the collapse of the national economy. And we have to very quickly move away from that new liberal path, which we have pursued for how many years, has not brought us any solution at all. And if we don't move from there, we have a crisis. I mean, I was listening to one of the text messages that you read. Was it a text message or you read from the newspaper?
From the paper.
A guy who says that, well, if this is the situation, then I would refer to Bobo. I would go back to Bobo.
Yes.
And so, electricity is not just for looking at our faces and reading newspapers. Electricity is for running the whole of society. It's about running industry. It's about running your health services. It has a huge impact on agriculture and so on. So electricity really is at the center of life. And that's how we ought to look at electricity. I mean, if you take water, water is not just about getting a cup into a drinking water and swallowing. Water is not just about your capacity to put, food together and so on. Water is also at the center of life itself. It impacts on every aspect of our life, on health, on agriculture, on everything, okay? So in dealing with these problems, we need to have a holistic look. We need to take a holistic look at life generally, at the Ghanaian within his environment and how he survives. And in doing that, I think that the time has come to reject completely the new liberal party development and to begin to think outside the box. I mean, this thing about thinking outside the box, now, we are not just thinking inside the box, in a small corner inside that box. That's where we are starting.
One of the four corners.
We are thinking the very small corner inside the box.
As a form of a punishment.
Yeah.
Asking a kid to just face a corner in the world. And it appears that is our thinking when it comes to the economy.
Yeah.
It's like somebody is deliberately pushed that into one dark corner and we're faced there. And all we see is the doom and gloom, the darkness in that particular corner. And although we are not chained or plastered to the wall, we're unable to even turn around to see the light around us.
Recently, I had the privilege of reading a book which had been authored by, I think, Professor Junior. I'm sure you are familiar with that book. A book on the Acheampong era.
Okay.
And I was fascinated about his treatment of Ghana's indebtedness in 1972, 73, 74.
The NTR.
Yes. I mean, read that book, the analysis, the scientific analysis and so on. That got us huge reliefs that up to today, no country has ever been able to secure. Just the method that the Acheampong government applied, in dealing with our indebtedness and so on. And yet today, you hear people still making jokes about Yentua and so on. I would recommend very strongly that people read the analysis of Professor Junior, in that book. It's a fantastic piece. Now, here is Acheampong thinking outside the box and making arguments, which make a lot of sense and which puts Western financial institutions on trial. Okay. Now, the first arguments were actually made by President Fidel Castro of Cuba in the early 1970s when he went to the non-aligned movement and argued that these debts were unpayable and that we pay these debts at our own peril, and that what we ought to do is we refuse completely to pay the debts. One of the examples which has been used over the years is Zaire under Mobutu Sese Seko. When the Western financial institutions were giving loans to Zaire under Mobutu Sese Seko, they knew that Zaire was not in a position to pay. And yet they kept pumping these loans to Zaire. The only reason why they did that was that they saw Zaire as a bastion against the spread of communism. So these loans were intended to achieve the foreign policy objectives of the West. It had nothing to do with the development of Zaire. It had nothing to do with the realization of the aspirations of the people of Zaire and so on. Why do you call on the people of Zaire to pay loans which serve your foreign policy interest and so on? Now, besides, the other very strong argument is that these loans are not payable. How do we pay them? We don't have the resources to pay them. If you take the United States of America, the United States of America is more indebted than Ghana. It's heavily indebted. It's more indebted than Ghana. Why is the debt not a burden for the United States of America? The debt is not a burden for the United States of America because the United States borrows in dollars. It owes in dollars. Okay? How does the U.S. deal with its debt crisis? Simply printing more currency.
More money.
You understand? When we have to deal with our indebtedness, we have to produce goods and services that we can sell in dollars in order to be able to pay. Why is this so? This is so simply because the dollar has become the currency of preference in international trade and international transactions. Okay? If that situation were altered, our debt would not be such a gruesome burden on us as well. But we are just talking about how to increase VAT, how to introduce e-levy, how to confiscate people's earnings and so on in order to go and pay debt. So the fundamental problem itself is left intact. Now, Randy, we are having these discussions at a time when the foreign exchange retention agreements we signed with mining companies is still in effect. We signed foreign exchange retention agreements with mining companies, which enables mining companies to keep 98% of the total value of the minerals they take out of your country outside your economy. Only 2% comes into your economy. You are heavily indebted. In trying to find solutions to your indebtedness, you are not looking at this obnoxious agreement. Why would you not get into debt if 98% of the value of minerals taken out of your country are kept outside your economy? You're obviously going to get into debt. So we are not looking at the structural problems. The other thing that I like to talk about, I've been speaking about for the last 40 years. Randy, if you take the relief map of Ghana, the relief map of Ghana, not the political map, take the relief map of Ghana. There's something which is so striking. Up to today, all our functioning rail lines start from areas of concentration of wealth. Timber, gold, diamond, bauxite, and so on. Where do they end up?
The port.
The ports. The whole infrastructure was built for extraction of wealth. That whole structure, from the colonial days. That is still the situation today. Why would you not run into that? So there ought to be some new thinking. And I'm not seeing that new thinking. I'm not hearing people discuss the new thinking. We are all caught up in this small box, not just in this small box, but in a small corner of the small box. That's why we are doing all our thinking. And things keep getting worse all the time. I mean, somebody should explain to me why we are still importing clinker to produce cement. Somebody must explain to me. When it has been established by the CSIR, I suppose, that's the name, CSIR, that there are many viable alternatives locally. Why are we still importing clinker? So if you don't change this mindset, we will continue to have these problems. You come to the construction industry, and today it is laughable. building all these monstrous structures. And now the tendency is to go for glass buildings and so on. Doesn't make sense. First of all, your Oboso glass factory has collapsed. You don't produce the glass, okay? Secondly, these glass buildings require air conditioning, which you don't produce. So the whole thing is just madness. Madness is responsible for our suffering. And somehow we have to get leaders who would attempt to get out of this madness. Otherwise, we are in it. Every quarter, tariffs are going to go up. Every quarter. The real value of wages and salaries will continue to dip. So where do we end? Crisis upon crisis.